The nice thing about private lending, especially nowadays with remote investing being so commonplace thanks to COVID, is you can be as involved as you want to be. So you could start out and just say, you know what, I want to place my funds with someone that's going to broker the money for me, and they're just basically going to connect me with a borrower, and that broker is going to do all the underwriting. That broker is going to collect the payment. Basically, I'm just there to supply the capital, and then I will get my payments, whether that's through the broker or directly from the borrower, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where you are doing all the underwriting, you are doing the due diligence on the property, on the borrower, you're doing the analysis, you're wiring the funds, like you're doing everything. So there's really that freedom to be as actively passive as you want to be.
All right, guys, welcome again to another amazing episode. Today we have Alex Breshears. She's a private money lender, a Regulation A fund investor. She's a multifamily underwriter, educator, limited partner in multifamily syndications. She does everything. She's also a professor. I just read that in the bio. I thought it was amazing. So she teaches, and she has an amazing Facebook group, Private Money Lending, which I absolutely love. I hadn't seen that twist in Facebook groups yet, and I think you hit a very key niche, and it's not spammy, because a lot of the private lending groups I have seen turn up to be just scam after scam posting. But check it out, please. It's a lot of value. I've actually met some private lenders on there. I just Googled city, and well, not Googled, but search in your group city, and contacted some, and we chatted. I learned what they do, and they're brokers. Some are private money. So yeah, it's very, very amazing group. But we're gonna dive in here because she's done a little bit of everything, and this is normally that other side that we talk about where you become the bank. And most people don't realize that you can also do this part. So we're gonna get some actionable tips. If you can, tell us a little bit about, when you first started, how you started that that private lending. How did you make yourself comfortable? So yeah, let's start with that, please.
So it actually happened all quite by accident. So about 20 years ago, I walked into a RIA event where my husband was stationed at the time. My husband's active duty Navy. And, this just, networking, talking to people in the community, the person happened to mention, he goes, "Oh, you're a math and science major. You should be good with numbers." And I was like, "Yeah, not too bad. I'm in Calc 3." And he goes, "Have you ever thought about being a loan broker?" And I was like, "No, not really. Never crossed my path." And he explained a little bit about what the process was. And he said the magic words every college student loves to hear: you can work your own hours. I was like,
Yeah.
sold. So I came on board with him, and he was actually what we would consider now a private money lender. He was lending out his own funds. He did have some like warehouse lines of credit with a bank, just kind of small time, doing maybe 6 to 10 deals a month, nothing outstanding. But back then, this is kind of the era of the pager and the fax machine. You were actually driving to the properties to collect an application from a borrower. You were walking the property to see the scope of work with a potential borrower. So I really learned the real estate business kind of crash course from the lending perspective. I did that for a few years in Florida. At some point, you get tired of being out in the heat. So I switched over to doing conventional lending for people that were ultimately buying these investor homes. And then obviously with the military, we move around a lot. We got moved out of state. So real estate kind of became something in the back burner. But when we were stationed here in Norfolk's kind of the hub of the Navy for the East Coast. So we had an opportunity to kind of stay here for a little while. And then we had this perfect storm. I hate to say it like that, with COVID, where, everybody was kind of brought home. Hard money lenders shut their doors and said, "We're going to take a beat. We're not going to lend." And just through my community, again, going back to active duty, other military members, I just happened to meet another active duty service member within the local community that said he was losing out on a deal because his hard money lender shut his doors a few days before he was supposed to close. And, it just happened to be he was the type of borrower I'd want to work with. It was the type of property I'd want to lend on. I was like, you know what, if you can give me like a couple weeks to get all the legal side straightened out and, get an EIN number, get a bank account, I was like, I'll do this. I'll fund this. We'll take that leap. And it ended up working out, beautifully. And I mean, he's a good friend to this day. We've done other deals since then, but it really just kind of came back from a place of, I was comfortable doing this because it was something that's literally how my introduction into real estate started so long ago.
That is amazing.
Nice.
German, you got something? Yeah, I see
Yeah,
it.
my head is like, wow, this is awesome. And the reason is because I particularly have people that ask me how do they start? Like they have some capital, right? And they, I mean, people go in real estate and they think that something's easier than other things. Besides, but they ask me about how do they start with hard money lending? How do they start lending their money because they have a W-2, they don't have the time, but they have the capital to not so much, I don't want to do the homework on the properties. I don't want to do this. Let me just lend my money. How do I start? And I was like, okay, let me find out. So I've been doing the research, but I got the expert. So if you can tell me how you start, how much you started with, and what got you comfortable to lend your money.
Yeah, the nice thing about private lending, especially nowadays with remote investing being so commonplace thanks to COVID, is you can be as involved as you want to be. So you could start out and just say, you know what, I want to place my funds with someone that's going to broker the money for me, and they're just basically going to connect me with a borrower, and that broker is going to do all the underwriting. That broker is going to collect the payment. Basically I'm just there to supply the capital, and then I will get my payments, whether that's through the broker or directly from the borrower, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where you are doing all the underwriting, you are doing the due diligence on the property, on the borrower, you're doing the analysis, you're wiring the funds, like you're doing everything. So there's really that freedom to be as actively passive as you want to be. And that's even beyond that, even post closing, you can set the expectations with your borrower and say, I want to check up, every day. I want to check up every week. I want to check up every month, whatever those expectations are. So you can remain as involved in the particular deal as you want to be.
Yeah.
So I would say from that perspective, that's really very open and flexible. It's just a matter of what your risk tolerance is, what your comfort level is, how involved you really want to be, and maybe what your knowledge base is from the very beginning. If you're brand new to real estate, you don't know a lot of the lingo, you don't know a lot of the terms for fix and flip and buy and hold, maybe that's an opportunity to place your funds with a broker and just kind of set the expectation with that broker and say, can you kind of teach me and walk me through this in the future? So future deals, it's easier for me to understand and work with you and get an answer back to you faster. So you can kind of work it from that perspective. Realistically, depending again on your risk tolerance and what you're trying to accomplish, you could start out with something as little as $30,000. There are still markets in the United States where you could be in a first lien position for anywhere between, I would say, $40,000 and $70,000. If you want to start with less than that, you could potentially look at doing something that would be a second lien position. Again, that's not for rookies, but it's something, it's a possibility. I think a common misconception is you need to start out with like $500,000 to do private lending. And it really can just be a good place to start and learn about real estate. Even something as simple as JVing with someone else where you're the capital partner could be considered private lending also. So if you want to be a capital partner to somebody who is more experienced, it's a great way to learn the business if your goal is to be an active investor.
No, that's amazing. There's a couple to unpack what you said, a couple key things you said. Everything was key actually, but
Yeah.
two of the things that really stood out to me is, when you say, the amount of money that you need to invest, right? A lot of people think that 500 million or $1 million, but $30,000, I know it sounds a lot for some people, and it can be when you're first saving. But in the grand scheme of things, if you can learn how to actually invest in your first $30,000, and even if you lose money, it's probably the best loss you can have to then actually learn how to maximize your potential. Because I know when I first lost that a certain amount of money like that, I was like, oh wow, but I've learned it in a way that no education could have ever paid for. Unfortunately, it's a loss, but
Yeah.
it is pretty big. And then the other thing I was going to say is about market. So, do you? Because I know, for example, the Midwest is pretty cheap, right? We invest in Ohio. You could buy a home for 25,000, right? So I guess it depends on the risk tolerance, but usually those are C areas, um, maybe even D areas. Do you recommend a newbie lender, right, going into that if they find an experienced flipper or no?
It really depends on their goals. So, for example, I only lend on fix and flips because I want to be in and out of a deal in a few months in this
Hmm.
particular environment with COVID. Those markets that are quote unquote cheaper, they tend to be pretty static markets. They're not going to be appreciation markets. So, for your house that might ARV for $50,000 this year, maybe might be $55,000 5 years from now.
Yeah.
You're really doing a cash flow play. So from a lender's perspective, I feel like if your loan to value is low enough where if the market does dip, you're not underwater, and you wouldn't mind owning that house if the loan defaults, it would probably be, it's still a collateralized asset. Theoretically, somebody's still going to come behind and buy that property once you get title back to it. If it does get that far, it's still a collateralized asset. So I'd say from that perspective, it wouldn't necessarily bother me from a new lender perspective. It's really going to be the operator of the deal. Can they execute the business plan? Do they have the experience? Do they have the boots on the ground? Are they also remote, for example? So it's those things that to me would matter more than possibly the property itself.
So what
That's very
specific
interesting.
criteria that you have or that you maybe started with and realized that you need to put in place?
Always learning. Real
Yeah,
estate will
yeah,
always
it's
teach you
always,
something.
yeah. You never stop learning this stuff, and
Never
there's
stop
always
learning.
there was something that you're like, wow, that you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
would say for the nice thing about private lending, I call it our blessing and our curse, is that it's flexible. So the way I do private lending can be very different than the way other people do private lending. And that's again both good and bad because active investors are going to invest differently from each other as well. But
Yeah.
I invest purely here in Hampton Roads as far as the private lending goes, because this is my backyard. This is the market I know. I really like this market because we fared really well during COVID because we had very low unemployment because we have a very high federal employment base
Yeah.
here. So our housing prices, our real estate assets have just gone through the roof in the last year. I mean, unbelievably so. And then under that same kind of notion, I am going to be lending on stuff that's purely fix and flip. So there's going to be a retail buyer involved in this process somewhere. So it has to be something that a retail buyer is obviously going to want. So, good school districts. So all three levels of school have to be 6 out of 10 or above. The house has to be within 10% of the average square footage of the neighborhood. And the house has an ARV within 10% of the median home price for that zip code. And that kind of keeps me to the basic bread and butter, the thing every flipper wants: 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, ranch, paint it beige and gray on the inside and redo the kitchens and countertops. And then it's sold the day it hits MLS. That's what my goal is as a lender. And that's something I like about private lending because your goals are very much aligned with the active investor versus, landlord tenant relationship tends to be very counterproductive in some cases. Whereas, when you're working with another investor, it's, you both want the property renovated, you both want the property rented, you both want the property sold, whatever the business plan is for that particular property. So again, it goes back to having that open communication with the borrower. They keep you in line. Hey, I ordered windows the day we closed, they haven't come in yet. We ordered appliances, those are 3 weeks on back order, those things. So if there are delays, you're aware of them.
No, that's amazing to hear that you have a process. Is there a specific time frame, maximum 6 months, 8 months? How quick are you looking to get out?
Realistically, 3 to 4 months, because
Wow, that's quick. Yeah.
by the time they close, the other kind of caveat that we've kind of put in place during COVID is we want something that's going to be a relatively minor rehab because of those supply chain issues.
Yeah.
And supplies, just the raw materials themselves were just going up exponentially for a short period of time there. I mean, wood, I think, has tripled in the last year as far as
Yeah,
prices
yeah,
go.
yeah.
So, we wanted to have our money kind of out for short periods of time on the off chance, something does fall off a cliff with the economy. I feel a little more secure now that the world's starting to open back up. But we wanted something that would be basically kind of a minor rehab, nothing structural. We're not taking out walls. We're not taking the thing down to the studs. It's just freshen up the kitchen, put in new flooring, paint, maybe change out some of the light fixtures, and then back on the market it goes. So it can be something that can be rehabbed in 3 to 4 months and then on the market with MLS and then goes into escrow with a retail buyer and they're in escrow 30, 45 days and we're in and out of the deal in 3 to 4 months.
That's amazing. I think anything under 6 months, obviously you're targeting some experience, flippers. So that I can tell that's your criteria.
Yes.
And for anyone listening out there, I mean, usually 3 to 4 months is it's relative quick. Quick. If they have that means they have their processes down and they've done this. And then if it's anything less than that, then they're pros. I've only
Yeah.
heard of very few people do like weeks. So, and yeah, so that's rare. And then, so are you? Sorry, I lost my question. German, go.
Well, I do have one, and this is for the people again that are trying to get in there. They talk about passive income, the tax. I don't want to say repercussions because that sounds like a punishment, but the tax implications on being a private lender. Is it passive income, which is taxed as passive income, or is it like more capital gains?
It's actually just basically interest earned. So if you think about like the interest you would earn on a savings account, that form that you get from your bank at the end of the year, it's regular interest earned. So from that perspective, I know a lot of private lenders will kind of mix some sort of equity into the equation somehow. I, for example, will invest in syndications as a limited partner to kind of get that equity side, that equity play. Other passive investors might have, one or two rentals. They might own a duplex or something. It's something where a lot of private lenders will also be owners or investing in some way where they're in the equity side of the deal for those kind of tax breaks that you were mentioning, like depreciation and whatnot, because you're not going to
Yeah.
get that when you're just purely on the debt side.
Right.
Yeah. So then do you take that and are you saying you do like a 1031 and then roll it into a um as a limited partner?
No,
How do you
it's two completely separate trains of
okay.
thought. So yeah, we have one pool of money that we do private lending with, and then we have another pool of money that we would invest in syndications
Got
because
you.
we're cash flow investors. So you're kind of making that halfway middle where you have the private lending that's constantly
Mm-hmm.
being churned, but then you have LP positions that hopefully will come in, routinely with quarterly dividends to kind of smooth out that up and down as you're
Got
looking
you.
for deals.
Gotcha. And then the way it happens in tax season, and then just for anyone listening, no one here is an accountant or a legal advisor, but we're just going through it. So when you do it at the end of the year, you're saying interest like a savings account, and basically that interest is the taxable portion, or you that gets shown to the IRS. Correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right, man. That's
One more
really
question then.
no. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, because I don't think you found yours yet.
No, I did. I wrote it down. That's
So
what.
okay, hey, so for our listeners and the viewers, this we're recording this in March, at the end of March. Um, how is the market playing right now? I mean, it's a hot market, whatever you look at. I mean, houses are the demand is huge. They're hot. Everybody is whoever doesn't have cash is not they're not able to close on any deals. How is that playing for you guys on the private investing side?
It's been tricky because we're having more investors coming to us with what they call our deals, but in my opinion, not really deals. They're paying, in my opinion, just way too much for what they have. Oftentimes, they're paying over asking. And when you sit and have a conversation, the banks aren't evaluating these ARVs very high. If anything, the banks have kind of gone the other way, in my experience, the conventional
Oh,
lenders. So if they plan on burring this property, they think this is going to be the perfect burr because they have this very inflated ARV because everything hitting the market is selling for over asking. Just because it's sold for over asking doesn't mean it's going to appraise for over asking. And since
yeah,
they're wanting to refinance, the appraisal is what matters to them, not the sales
yeah,
price. And when you're having that conversation with them that this is not the deal you think it is, and then they're like, oh well, I'll just throw it on the market and sell it. Well, this is not a retail neighborhood, so if you sell it, you're going to have to sell it to another investor, and in my opinion, they're far less likely to pay for an
Yeah, full
occupied
price.
rental. Yeah, exactly. They're not going to do that.
They're investors.
So
They're not gonna buy at market value.
yeah, so it's interesting to see that coming across a little more, and it's personally been a little scary because I've come across new investors that I'm happy they've taken this opportunity to better themselves financially and try to get involved in investing, but they're taking out like HELOCs on their primary residence to go and get into these deals thinking they're going to burr them and get that money back out. And then when you have a conversation with them and say, you're potentially leaving $20,000 to $30,000 of your HELOC of your primary residence locked in equity in this property. The look on their face is like deer in the headlights. Like, what do you mean? I'm going to burr it. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. But they're only going to give you, the days of 80% LTV cash out
Oh, that's
refinances on
gone.
investment
Yeah.
properties, not there. So
Mhm.
at best, you're 75%, and then you got to roll in closing costs for that refinance. So you're really
Yeah.
looking at more like 72, and you're already buying it above 72 plus renovation. So when you kind of run through the numbers in
Yeah.
a more conservative fashion, they get a little surprised. So
You
that's been a
know,
little challenging.
I love when everything you said, man. I'm loving this interview so much because you know you're a math person, and I really love that because I hear so much, right? Real estate so easy, is basic math, and this. While the concepts are basic, if you want to be a true professional in anything, right, you're gonna have to get a little bit sophisticated in your analysis, right? And that's not basic at all, and that takes a little bit of experience too of failure and messing up. But the Burr method, I love it too. But people think I can put $1 million into a flip and that is going to appraise at $1 million.
Yep.
That's not the way residential works. That's not the
No.
way market comps
Yeah.
work, right? And that's one of the reasons we talk about why commercial has a clear advantage over residential. But I love that you hit that. It's not gonna appraise. You have to do those numbers and really the nitty gritty. I love bigger pockets, but I think that's where they're failing people. Really that the Burr method is advertised so much. So I have a question. What's the typical return that you can expect? And I know this everyone's different. Your experience is different, but for you, what's the typical you can
I would
expect that is?
I would say for a first lien position, anywhere from 8% to even up to 14% in some markets is what your kind of annual interest rate would be.
Yeah.
You can charge anywhere between 0 points and 5 points for origination fee. Your limitations really going to be a set of rules called usury laws that are for the state the borrower is in. So usually the private lender and the borrower and the property are all in the same state. But that's kind of going to that's going to be the upper limits of what you can actually charge, because anything above that is technically an illegal loan. So that's
Oh,
really the part that gets people. So it's a little bit like the wild, wild west. You can kind of set your own prices, but there is that upper limit where you want to stay within limits of the usury laws.
And
so
it's just and it's also based on market, right? Depending on what the competition is doing, because you don't want to be the guy that is charging most and nobody's gonna come to you because they can find it cheaper
yeah,
somewhere else.
Yeah, I
always.
mean, it really does. And it's also your business model. So, like, for example, you mentioned earlier, like, I want to work with experienced investors. So they're not going to pay 14% for a first lien position because they're not a 14% risk. They have
Yep.
a
Yeah.
contractor team that goes from deal to deal to deal. They've done this 100 times. They are going to be an 8% borrower. Whereas if you're someone that's, fresh off the block, you've never done this before, 14% might not be enough, because most people that do their first fix and flip end up losing money in that fix and flip. So, you want to make sure that it's priced accordingly to the business plan, the market, and what the deal actually is.
Perfect. I love it.
Yeah. So can you walk us through, you know, the steps that you take? And then you mentioned, the laws, right? The legal piece. Can you? Every state's different, but in your case, and you've moved around, right? So I'm sure you've seen different, but the generic, you know, path that there is, and then filing. I imagine you go to a county clerk or something to put the lien. Uh, how does that all work, right?
That part is pretty standard. So
Oh, okay.
when it comes to the closing part, what most people kind of think of private money is I'm going to give you $100,000 check and then you're going to take that to closing, and like that's not what happens at all. So I'm actually, as a lender, going to, once we've done due diligence and we say we're going to fund the deal and here's how much we're going to loan, we actually wire the funds to closing. And the borrower always, always, always brings funds to closing. You never, ever, as a borrower, give money directly to the private lender. That's a scam 100% of the time. Never do it. So all the money that exchanges hands before the deal closes only exchanges hands through the escrow company, the closing attorney, title company, whatever you're using. So that's rule number one. But from there, really, it's just me wiring money to the closing attorney. The closing happens at the closing attorney's office. The HUD one, shows where all the funds are being dispersed. If there's any funds above and beyond the purchase price that are going to be used for renovations, that can vary from private lender to private lender and how that's handled. What I personally do is the money's held in escrow. And then as the repairs and renovations and things are done and installed and paid for, the active investor then gets reimbursed from those escrow funds. I do know
Mm,
private lenders that will give them, some upfront to order the supplies or, pay a deposit to the contractor or whatever, but I
yeah,
do a refund model.
got you. So does the escrow account directly pay the contractors? Is that the way you have it? Because
The
I know that's
escrow No, the
I
escrow company actually pays the active investor because
and then the active.
the active investor has to pay the contractors, because the contractors are signing off on the dotted line, a mechanics lien waiver
Yeah,
saying I was paid in full for this roof or this tile job or whatever they happen to do.
Yep.
And then that's something that they submit to us as a lender saying, look, here's pictures of the tile floor installed. Here's a lien waiver from the tile installer.
yeah,
Here's the invoice showing it was
got
paid,
you.
and then we reimburse the active investor.
To release the funds. Okay.
Hmm.
And then as far as you setting up that escrow, is that part of the escrow that is done at closing, or is that a separate escrow account that you set up?
That is going to be at closing. So I
Okay,
would contact the closing attorney and say it's good to go ahead and disperse, $5,000 or
got
whatever it
you.
happens to be, to the active investor.
Yeah, so that's awesome. You have the escrow account established during the whole transaction and closing. It remains there as the flip is being done, and then the disbursements happen as they prove the maintenance repairs are happening. Okay.
Yes.
And then as far as the legal side of paperwork, um, what kind of contract are you setting up with this active investor? And then where is that getting documented and recorded at?
So generally they'll sign two pieces of paper. You can have them sign additional things, but the two most important pieces of paper are going to be the promissory note. And then depending on your state, it's either going to be a deed of trust or a mortgage. And then that all happens at closing. And then the deed of trust or mortgage is then sent to the courthouse for the municipality the property is in. And then that actually gets recorded, and that's your secured lien on the property. So if there's ever a title search pulled for that property, if they go to sell it or refinance it, it will show up as a lien on that property. So they can't obviously issue clear title until that lien is paid.
Nice, nice. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about the laws? Where can what are the limits? How do you know if you're breaking the limit portion that you mentioned earlier?
I would say that is a great question for an attorney that's familiar with lending. A lot of people will just go and talk to their local, like, closing real estate attorney, and nothing against them, but they generally don't know a lot about lending, because if you think about it,
They've been on
all
the
the
other side.
lending docs are usually sent to them. They just have to point it and say, sign here. They're not the ones generally drawing up that documentation. So it's really important to have a conversation with an attorney that's familiar with lending in your area, because it's not like the usury laws are set like maximum 15%. There's actually all these layers. So one individual
Oh,
lending money to another individual is one set of usury laws.
mhm.
A one LLC lending money to another LLC is a different set of usury laws. So when you go back to kind of the structure of your business model, most people, and even hard money lenders do this for this reason, they will open an LLC, do their lending out of the LLC, but they will only lend money to another LLC. So if you're an active investor and you've had a hard money loan company tell you that we will only lend to your LLC, there's the reason probably is because the usury laws are more, what shall we say, fruitful. They have higher limits if it's an LLC lending money to another LLC versus two individuals involved in the transaction. So that's why I say that layer of complexity really is best answered by an attorney.
Mm, okay. No, no, but that gave us exactly what I was looking at, because for the people that move around a lot too, and they think they might know the law where they're currently living, and then they move, they have to be aware that these things vary by state to state, and I imagine even by city and county laws as well, that may change as well. Am I correct on that?
In some places, there actually are different usury laws for different municipalities,
Yeah.
beyond the state level. So absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's all great info. Let me see here. German, what do you have?
Well, let's and because I think we got enough of the private lending side, and I was pretty excited because I don't hear it a lot. I mean, we hear
Yeah,
about hard money lending, but we don't hear the intricacies of it. So it was pretty good in education. Go ahead, Oscar.
I do have one. So hard money lending and private money. What is your difference definition?
To me, they are two very different things, and I know a lot of investors use them interchangeably.
Hmm.
And I just did.
But yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah.
But it sounds like a small distinction, but it has huge implications. So private money is money that person's usually their own capital, whether it's capital that they have, capital they have access to. They are basically the ones that can make the decision for the terms, the length, whatever it happens to be, what they're willing to lend on. Whereas hard money loans or hard money lenders are normally backed by some warehouse entity, whether it's a hedge fund out of New York, whether it's a warehouse line of credit they have with a big bank. And those entities come with strings attached. So they have basically kind of submitted their business plan to this warehouse line of credit provider and say, we will only lend to borrowers that have above a 680 credit score. We won't go above 65% LTV. We will always charge 3 points. We will always do this. We will always do that. So if you as a borrower don't check all those boxes, they can't do a loan for you because they have the strings attached. So when you're
Yeah.
talking to a private money lender, you're talking to the underwriter, you're talking to the processor, you're talking to the person that's making the decisions. So we have a lot more flexibility to say, okay, well, this one, we're probably comfortable doing 70% LTV, whereas this, this other deal, no, this really needs to be at 65 for this other reason.
Oh,
Okay.
that makes sense.
That makes total sense. Yeah. Now that you say it that way, yeah, total. Because in the past I've always, and I know when we talked, I was like, after we left, I was like, man, what's it? Because
Hey.
you made that point, and you told me, no, 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 I private lend, I don't hard money, and I was
Yeah.
like, all right, maybe she knows
That's pretty
something
cool.
I
I
don't
mean,
know. Yeah, yeah.
I've been mixing those two terms like it's crazy. So that's pretty
No, no,
cool.
and if
Learn
you,
something
I
too.
mean, yeah, and if you usually here's what you said, people always
Yeah.
say, no, they're the same thing because they're not,
Yeah.
traditional money, but you made it clear distinction, and that's true.
Okay.
So let me ask you, if people wanted to learn about private lending before we move on private lending, where could they actually learn other than your amazing group, which I encourage everyone to join?
Unfortunately, that's why the group was started.
Oh,
There's
okay.
not a lot of education out there. There's a couple books, that are available on Amazon, but realistically, I own all of them. They read more like textbooks than they do kind of a how-to manual.
Yeah,
So it's really, unfortunately, it's kind of a way of investing that's still very much kind of in the dark ages when it comes to
yeah,
education, and which is a whole reason I started the group because, like you mentioned at the beginning, every group I had joined previous to this one was just a place for scams and spam. There was nothing
yeah,
educational. There was nothing networking based. And even to Bigger Pockets credit, they have all these amazing books on how to evaluate a scope of work and how to buy your first apartment building in 30 days and how to do this and how to do that. And the only way private lending is mentioned, even in Bigger Pockets, is go find a private lender to fund your deals. And that leaves a whole crowd of people on the other side of the table like, okay, how do we do this?
yeah,
So that's really where it stemmed from. And I would say the best place is really to just start talking to other people that are doing private lending. And I know that sounds far easier to say than it actually is to do, because
Yeah.
private lenders tend to take the private part quite seriously. We're like the hide and go seek champions, but
Yeah.
it's when you can sit down and have a conversation and go, kind of how does it work? What are the expectations? Because I have a lot of active investors. The group used to be closed to active investors, but when I talk to active investors, when I realized how little education they even had about how to use private money,
Yeah.
I had them thinking private money was basically a down payment assistance program. So, they didn't have 20% to put down on their rental they wanted to buy. So go find a private lender. I'm like, no, 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 that's not how this works at all. So I would say, if you really want to start with some books, there are some decent books on Amazon, but again, they're going to read more like textbooks than how-to manuals.
Yeah.
If you have a good hard money loan broker in your area, somebody you could build a relationship with, maybe having a conversation with them, just talking about the loan process. But
Mhm.
I would say, maybe ultimately, you just pay for a couple hours of a real estate attorney's time, that's going to know about lending, and they'll be able to kind of walk you through the documentation, the usury laws, the limits, what's commonly done. That would probably be, in my opinion, the safest way to really get started. If it's something, I have a lot of people like, oh, I don't want to pay for an attorney. I'm like, you're about to give someone
Yeah.
$100,000. You don't want to spend $600 to make sure you're protected. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get what you pay for, right? And
Right.
if you pay zero, you're gonna get probably negative in that that example.
You mentioned that it's very difficult, and I want to go
I know the next part.
to the other one. So the last question, I swear, it's just that you keep bringing points that raises more questions.
I know.
You
I'm sorry.
mentioned, you mentioned hard money lending broker. Is there any private money or private lending brokers out there that people can go to instead? Because now that I hear, it's like I'd rather go to a private lender than a
Yeah,
hard money
Jeremy, we go
lender.
to them all the time. What are you talking about?
A private lender broker?
There
Yeah, the
is
guys
there
that we
Oh,
go to,
okay.
they're brokers. They manage all the money.
Oh,
There's
Yeah,
okay, cool.
there
private, commercial, private
Oh,
equity,
yes,
you name
actually.
it.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. I thought there
there's a
was a
couple
distinction
different
in that.
ways there's a couple different ways that brokers can be involved. So they can kind of maintain a relationship with, say, maybe high net worth individuals that want to invest in this alternative investment. And then basically you would make an application with that broker, and then they kind of shop your file to various investors and say, does anybody want to fund this deal? And that's called whole note investing. There's some other brokers that will kind of say, they'll kind of piecemeal a deal together. So if you have $100,000 loan, they'll have a pool of investors that say, okay, I'll chip in 20, this other person will chip in 30, this other person will chip in 50, and that's called fractional note investing. So both of
Mhm.
those are commonly done, and it's usually done through a broker.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah, brokers. I'll throw that plug out there. Brokers in anything like mortgage broker, a uh, a funding
Insurance
broker,
broker.
insurance brokers, they bring you the most competitive rate. I'm not gonna go to
Mm-hmm.
Bank of America. I'm gonna go to brokers. Like I don't. To me, it doesn't bother me paying an origination fee or a fee to them because they bring value and they
Yep.
save me all this time from bouncing around and getting the cheapest price. So
Okay,
I'll throw that out there. Yeah,
let's
jump
jump
into
into the
next.
next
Go
subject. Go
ahead.
ahead.
What you got, Jeremy?
No,
No.
go ahead. Yeah, I know your roast questions.
All right. So, now you're moving into other lanes, right? So you've gone. I mean, you've been a chemistry teacher that's huge, and you're teaching other people about real estate investing as well. But you're also an LP, and which is for those that maybe it's the first episode, limited partner and then syndication. But then you're also now starting your own fund. How has this prepared you to start a fund?
That one really kind of was born out of our sphere of influence, shall we say, the people we have around us. So the two key principal managers are, one's an active duty service member, the other one's a veteran. I'm a military spouse. So
Mhm.
obviously when it comes down to these syndication processes, just the way Regulation D is structured with 506B and 506C, obviously one 506C is only available to accredited investors, and a lot of military members and their families tend not to fall into that accredited investor category. And then 506B, while it does allow what they call sophisticated investors, you're limited on the number of sophisticated investors. And while that sounds awesome, what it ends up doing is it actually ends up raising the minimum, usually to about $50,000. It really depends on the raise that the particular syndicator needs to raise capital.
Hmm.
But usually it's $50,000. Maybe on a rare occasion, it's about $25,000, usually about the lowest I've seen. But even then, that can be a little bit of a stretch for a lot of military families, especially active duty families. Military spouse unemployment and underemployment has historically been very, very high. COVID did us no favors in that category. So oftentimes military families, if they do have two parents, are oftentimes single income households just
Yeah.
because of the moving around and childcare and not having a career. So we kept, having these stories and these conversations with these active duty service members and these veterans saying, we'd love to help you invest in multifamily. We strongly believe this is a great asset. This is a great, class to be in, but we just can't because of the way Regulation D was structured. And I think they closed on 3 different deals just during COVID alone. And having that conversation 3 times with military members, it's like, we got to find a solution. We have to
Yeah.
find something. So it kind of backtracks, like a lot of things in real estate. You start with the goal first, and then you work backwards to figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
So Regulation A ended up being something where we could have a low enough minimum. So the minimum for the Regulation A fund is $5,000 versus $50,000. But you still get that benefit of ownership come tax time, because you're still getting that depreciation. You're getting that K1 at the end of the year, just like you would in a syndication. But the investment is lower, but it's also diversified across multiple properties. So you end up if you want to think about it in a very simple way, you end up being a part owner in everything that fund buys. So instead of plunking $50,000 into just one investment in one property in one market, you're invested
Hmm.
in multiple properties, potentially across multiple markets. So you end up being more diversified with less capital risk.
Yeah, and just to clarify for the audience out there, is no different than like a mutual fund where you're diversifying with stocks and different technology versus commodities or whatever it may be. Here you're maybe diversifying whatever the business plan. I'm not sure what is your business plan as far as asset class, but are you just focusing on multifamily
We are
or?
focusing on multifamily, value add, class B, class C properties, class B, class C neighborhoods.
Okay, yeah, so that's a diversification model of different properties right there, which is super awesome. You're doing like everything I want to do. I'm not gonna lie. I think you're my I'm gonna put a little picture of you right here because honestly, like you're doing
Yeah.
funding. I love that this whole side, right? Like for me, real estate investing, haven't tried different strategies for a long time. It really has been only the last few years where I've hit into syndication funds and private lending. I'm like, why haven't I done this before?
And that's the sentiment I hear over and over and
Yeah.
over again. See people, they go through this real estate hazing, as I call it. So
Yeah, yeah.
you go through the fix and flip or the buy and hold, and
Hmm.
then you realize how miserable you are doing both of those. And then after
Hmm.
you do that, like the door opens up to this just buffet of options that are available to you after you've gone through the hazing. So if you've
Yeah.
made it through doing your first fix and
Uh,
flip or your first landlord
Yeah.
experience, that's when they're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
by the way, there's all these other cool things you can do.
Yeah, no, because
yeah.
I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, man, we put a down payment of almost 300,000 on our portfolio to buy, and then what could I have done with 300,000 on the private money side? And it made me really think, like, when we did it, we were
Yeah.
just really getting into a different scale, but
We could
you
have
don't
been the
really
bank from
think,
day one.
yeah,
Yeah.
you don't really think about how you can do it from a different perspective, right? And no one, like you said, it's just not out there. Um, and that's why, we're excited to have you on because it's a different perspective that people don't usually hear, especially like you
Yeah.
said, military, people who are not accredited investors don't, don't hear about this stuff. So
Yeah.
how is the military receiving, military members receiving, the concept of the fund and grasping it, right? Because I love my military members. I'm a military member. Brother's a military member, but sometimes it can be hard, especially to make not make people, but to teach like, hey, this is a financial opportunity for you, right? Because all we get taught, well, if we get taught, is TSP, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, put money in your savings, right? So how has that been for you as far as teaching?
I think it's been easier, if anything, when you compare it to something like syndication or even buying a rental house, for example, because the $5,000 is a lot less scary than putting in $50,000 or, having to put a 20% down payment on, a $200,000 duplex, wherever they are. If they're in San Diego, if they're stationed in San Diego, you're not going to find anything out in San Diego for under $600,000, to live
Yeah,
in. So, if you're
exactly.
having to buy investment property out there in San Diego, you're really chunking down some change out there.
Hmm.
So I think in the grand scheme of things, the ability to kind of experiment and get started in real estate for $5,000, and you can start getting the distributions, you can start getting the investor updates, you can start learning the language. It's, if anything, it's helping to build that habit and that mindset that you can be an investor while you're active duty. It's not something that you're going to have to go and swing a hammer on the weekends, and pray you don't have duty and all these other things. It's something that you can fit into the busy lifestyle that you already are leading.
Yeah. No, that's true. And are you getting a lot of attention from the military community as far as wanting to go into the fund?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been incredible because I think there's so many people out there that want an opportunity to invest in real estate, but whether it's time, capital, just from geography, I've
Yeah.
moved 19 times in 20 years. The idea of
Yeah.
trying to buy a rental house in every place we've been stationed is just horrifying.
Yeah.
So, not to mention some of the places we've been stationed are not rental areas to begin with. They're just not cash flow markets. So, I think a lot of the VA loan is a great thing, but I think it can also kind of set back a military investor because a lot of places will go and say, oh, go buy a house with your VA loan and then rent it out when you leave and then rinse and repeat everywhere you go. But they're not having that follow on conversation of, does that meet your goals? Is it a cash flowing
Yeah.
market? Do you have the reserves? For example, if the AC breaks in one of your rental houses, you might spend $5,000 putting that brand new AC
Yeah.
in, but that did not increase the value of your house by $5,000. So there are a lot of what I would call sunk costs with owning real estate. And people are like, oh, but it's going to appreciate. And it's like, I'm one of those people, do not bank on the appreciation. That's icing on the cake. It needs to
Yeah.
cash flow from day one in order to be in my portfolio. So don't
Oh
bank
my
on
God.
appreciation.
Especially
Man,
in residential. Yeah.
that's what I say. Icing on the cake, right?
Yeah.
Because I think in commercial, it's all about the equity play because you
Yeah.
can truly force appreciate it. It's less on the cash play. But in the buying whole, like I have a property that appreciated. I think obviously because the market is ridiculous, um, almost like 150, 190,000, which I would have never imagined by anything that Colorado Springs was going to appreciate by like 15% in a year. And then the year before it was going to be 10%. Like, who would think that, right? It's just ridiculous numbers. But then to me, that's icing on the cake because I was really looking at it from a hold and cash flow perspective, right? And yeah, a lot of people don't understand that. So I you know, I link up on that. We're synced up.
Yeah, I mean it's really, and that's what I hear most often from active investors. They're like, "Oh, I had to put new flooring in or I had to paint it or whatever." And it's like, "Oh, but it's gonna appreciate when I sell it in 5 years." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you're out $5,000 right now."
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you live and you learn. German, what else you got that we could dive into?
No, no, I'm fascinated. I'm actually fascinated with the fact that you're creating a community, right? And that's what my brother and I are doing. And it takes an immense amount of work to do that. You created a Facebook group. You do so many other things. I mean, you're creating the community of, well, I wouldn't say community, but all these activities that you're going into in your life. You're a lender, and you got your fund. And now you're creating a community on Facebook, in helping out the military members, active duty military members. I really admire it, because like I said, my brother and I were working on doing that. It takes a lot of work. So I truly admire it. Not only that, but you're also a professor, a chemistry professor. Oh my God, out of everything, a chemistry professor. So it just blows my mind. Seriously, I truly admire you. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I mean, I keep myself busy. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah,
like it.
no, that's awesome.
And you're smiling. You don't look like that worn out person that is like, oh my God, I'm tired. I can't even do
Yeah.
a podcast. It's like you seem like you enjoy every minute of it. I love it.
I mean, I
Yeah.
really do. As an extrovert stuck inside during COVID, the group that I created has actually been a saving grace. I mean, I've met 2 business partners through that group. I've
Yeah.
talked to people on 5 different continents that invest, in the United
Mhm.
States but live abroad. I mean, it's just been a phenomenal opportunity for networking and meeting new people, and it's kept me sane because I'm married to someone. If I get 100 words out of him at once, that's a chatty Cathy day for him. So
That's funny. That's funny. But I love that it's helped you during this time of COVID, because just like you, I'm an extrovert, but however, for me, it's just I'm so busy and I come home, I have the kids and this, so I don't have time. And you said it in the beginning, the whole blessing piece, even though it's COVID, but this whole technology and being able to have, events on Zoom has helped me because in the past I couldn't take time to go at 7 p.m., to a real estate event. I gotta put my kids to bed. So right after this, that's what I'll do, right? So I really feel for everyone out there, but you got to take the positives out of the moment too, right? But
yeah,
Alex,
absolutely.
tell the audience where they can find you.
Let me
You
ask one
know,
more question. Let me ask
I knew it.
No, I love the subject of introvert and extrovert, and you mentioned you're an extrovert. So were you always an extrovert, or the what you do right now uh, got you to become an extrovert out of force? I don't know. I don't know how to phrase it.
Oh, I would say I've always been an extrovert. My spouse and I have been married for 20 years, and we've always said that I'm pulling him out of his shell and he's stuffing me back into mine. So it's definitely one of those situations where opposites attract. So,
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
guess you can't have 2 talkative people in the same relationship. That tends to be a problem, right? So, and then
yeah.
2 quiet people, there would be no relationship. So you kind of need that balance.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. That's awesome.
No,
Go ahead,
that's
Oscar.
great. All right. Well, we're gonna respect your time, almost an hour here, but I'm sure people got amazing value out of this. So if you can, go ahead, tell them where they can reach you. Tell us all about your Facebook group, Mission Capital, etc. Anything you want to tell the audience.
Absolutely. So the group is called Private Lending Lessons. It's on Facebook. Feel free to join. Like I said, it's purely educational and networking based. So it's everybody's welcome, passive investors and active investors and people just kind of starting out. And then the fund is called Mission First Capital. So they can go to missionfirstcapital.co, not .com. It's .co. So if they want to learn more about what we're doing with the fund, and then I'm also on LinkedIn. So my URL for LinkedIn is actually my personal mantra I live by. That's I invest passively to live actively. So it's that's literally how I kind of focus everything in my world is if it doesn't
Right.
fit in that mantra, I can say no without guilt because I know what my passion and my drive is.
My God, I love it. Yeah, amazing. So, if you don't have a mantra, you feel bad. Get yourself a mantra.
Right?
All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us, Alex. It's been amazing. And out there for the listeners, please give us a check out all the other episodes. Give us a 5-star review if you love this. Check out the ebook, the course, everything else that we're doing. We're always excited to help reach out. And we're out. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.